All right, Nikki, you have the floor. Everyone, thank you for being here today. I guess I should introduce Nikki. Nikki is our guest speaker presenter today. She is an appraiser who's been in the business a very long time, lots and lots of knowledge. And she volunteered to do this presentation today, so thank you so much. We're really looking forward to it. So I have you as a co-host. You can go ahead and do what you need to do with your presentation.
All right, so I'm going to share my screen.
You can go ahead and do what you need to do with your presentation.
All right, so I'm going to share my screen. Okay, so hopefully everybody can see that.
Yes.
Okay, perfect.
Sounds good.
So the reason
All right, Mason.
The reason I volunteered to create a presentation for the realtors is because we are starting to see a lot, not a lot, but probably 10 to 20% of purchases that are not appraising for the contract amount. And there's a lot of different things that probably are impacting that. When I look at what is driving the market today, it really is nothing more than, economics 101. We're not in balance in terms of our market. We have the lowest inventory levels that we've had for over a decade, and we've probably got the highest amount of demand that we've had in over a decade. You add to that the fact that land costs are increasing at an unbelievable rate, and construction costs. I talk to a lot of builders each month when we're doing appraisals of new construction, and they are telling me that from the time that they bid a job to the time that it ends, they are running into a lot of factors, including shortages of materials. And when those shortages occur, the prices go up, or they can't get the materials that they originally quoted. And I've had a number of builders tell me recently that at the current list price, they're not making any money. So one of the things that I really want to emphasize is that, unfortunately, from an appraisal perspective, cost does not equal value. It never has. There's, definitions of cost and definitions of value, and they just are not the same thing. We're seeing appreciation in this market depending on the property type, the location, and where the property price point is, between 10 and 20%. So I would say that at the low end of the spectrum, I'm seeing increases of probably up to 20% a year. And at the higher end of the spectrum, we're seeing increases of 10% plus. It just kind of depends. There's so little on the market that, of course, you're all aware, we have bidding wars going on. And the problem arises when there's a bidding war that if the property cannot appraise, now the purchaser has to either come up with the difference in cash or they lose out. And there are plenty of buyers in the market who are willing to pay cash with no appraisal, no inspection. They're investors that are looking for somewhere to park their money, and they just believe that the current level of appreciation is going to continue, and this is really keeping our first-time home buyers out of the market. We're seeing a lot of for sale properties turned into rental properties. We're seeing homes with basements coming in, being renovated. The basement is turned into rental space, and now they're renting it out as an accessory dwelling unit. we're seeing requests for refinances where the buyer bought the house anywhere from 3 months ago to 2 years ago, and they're pulling out cash already because they can refinance based on the price that they paid and where they see the market is currently going. I wanted to share a case study with everybody. This happened last week. We had a situation where the contract price was $30,000 over the list price. And the buyer was paying cash with no appraisal, no inspection. And then within 60 days, the buyer went to refinance the property, and we got the order to appraise the property. There were 8 sales in this buyer's subdivision within the last 6 months that could be used as comparable data. And the highest selling priced home in this subdivision at the time was, I think, $550,000. And the contract price was over $625,000. So already you can see that the price the buyer was willing to pay was well above what the most expensive house in that subdivision had sold for in the recent past. So, and I don't know the answer to this question. Is there any liability here? Did the listing agent, how did they come up with their list price for that property? Did they look at those comparables that were in that particular subdivision? I'm finding that a lot of agents are going outside of that subdivision to other subdivisions in other markets that might not even be in what the appraiser would consider the neighborhood to come up with comparables. So how did that listing agent come up with the price? And then the buyer's agent, did they do any due diligence for their client and say, you know, there aren't any homes in this subdivision that have sold above X price, and we could have difficulty having this property appraised for that amount. Now, if it's a cash buyer, they don't care, and there's, you know, very little out there in the market, they're going to pay that. But the problem is that the comparables in the market don't support that price. So what we're seeing is that the market, the buyers, the sellers, the listing agents, the selling agents, we're all kind of anticipating what the market is going to do. We're assuming that if it's been going up 10% a year, it's going to continue to go up 10% a year, which may be true, you know, but it may not be true. So when I look at a listing and think about using it as a comparable for something I'm appraising, I'm assuming that that agent took some responsibility for that listing, and that each of the data fields was input correctly. And we find that probably, and I'm not exaggerating, probably 15 to 20% of the required MLS fields of data are not input correctly. And that's kind of a problem from the standpoint that today's appraisal software has the ability to download information directly from MLS, which we then go and try and verify with a variety of different sources. We typically, appraisers typically use public records for verification of data. We go to the auditor's office and we will verify the sales price. We go to the assessor's records and we will verify what the assessor is showing as the square footage of the property. Another issue that comes up is a lot of times the sale price that's reported in MLS doesn't match what the assessor's records show as the sale price. The closing date doesn't match. Are we using the date that it was recorded? Are we using the date that the buyer signed the escrow papers? You know, what date are we typically using? And the date we should be using is the date of recording. We are not seeing appraisers are not seeing the correct financing type. We'll see other, we'll see, and then we'll go to check it and find out, well, it was a VA or it was an FHA, and the agents are not reporting that correctly. How can we tell? We look at the deed of trust that was probably recorded immediately following that property. Another big issue is mapping. I can't tell you how many agents are not mapping their listings correctly. And I don't know if it's because they fear that buyers who are looking for a particular property won't look at their listing if it's mapped correctly. I don't know. And so what happens is appraisers do a map search for comparables, and maybe your listing doesn't show up because it was not mapped correctly. And then finally, good photographs. I'm seeing more and more agents are using professional photographers, which is wonderful. I wish all agents could afford to use professional photographers, because obviously the quality of the photographs varies considerably. We need photographs of every room, every level, front and back, any additional amenities to the property. Is there a pool? Is there a shop? Tell us about the shop. Does it have electric? You know, is there power? Does it have water? Is there any finish in it? What's the eave height? Are there any roll-up doors? You know, all of those things could be discussed in the remarks that will assist the appraiser, will assist other realtors that are looking at your listing, and, you know, just maybe even saves a phone call from the agent or from the appraiser to the agent. We will check the public records, and they are very good about having a footprint or dimensions or square footage of the shop, but they don't typically have any other description of it. So, you know, it's you're probably pulling up the assessor's data. Go ahead and input what the size of that shop is so that anybody looking at that listing really knows. Show the interior so that we know, is this a pole building? Is this a metal building? You know, what exactly is it? And then if the appraiser calls you, they're calling you for one of two reasons. They're either appraising your listing and they need more data, they have questions about the property, and they would also be interested in knowing what comparables you used to appraise the property, because here's what happens. The appraiser selects their comparables, they put them in the appraisal, and then it doesn't appraise, or the bank has questions, and they come back with additional comparables for us to consider. Well, if we ask you for those comps that you considered in the beginning, that saves a revision request, which is now saving everybody some time. The other reason we might call you is because we're appraising another home in your listings neighborhood. And so we are looking for some additional data about your property to use as a comparable. So it helps everybody if you take the call, if you return the call quickly, and if you're honest with the appraiser during the call. some additional of the common errors that we see in the MLS data compared to the listing data on the assessor's office. So what source of square footage is the listing agent used? If you use the assessor's data, it should match. But we have some issues with the way that MLS shows data and the way that the assessor shows data and the way that the appraiser is required to show data on the appraisal form. Whenever there is livable space below the front door, the appraisal form requires us to show that as below grade space. Now, it can be finished and we can show it as finished and we can value it as finished, but we have to show it below grade. And what we believe a lot of agents are doing is they're taking the total square footage of the property, including that below grade square footage, and they are putting that in at $1 per square foot that they are maybe comparing it to with listings that don't have any below grade space. So that can create some issues. Below grade space is typically valued at a lower price point than above grade square footage. Then we have some differences in the design type. Ramblers are typically more expensive to construct, and they are not good comparables, say, for a two-story, because two stories are a lot less expensive to construct. We're seeing a lot of new construction these days, especially in high-end homes where the lot slopes considerably, which affords the ability to create a walkout daylight basement. And then that gives 2 levels of pretty tremendous views to property. Those new homes are actually functioning like an inverted 2-story. And they've got, 10-foot ceilings, just like the upper levels do, or maybe 12-foot ceilings. And we give those the same value on that lower level that we do on the above grade level. But we can't do that for a lot of these older homes that the finishes are nowhere near comparable to what we're seeing on the above grade finishes. So we get a lot of revision requests because the data doesn't match. If you've got a floor plan, put it in your association documents so that we see how you arrived at that square footage. Perhaps the assessor was given a set of plans and then there were changes made in the field that were not reflected in the assessor's records. So we measure the improvements, and a lot of times we will take the building footprint that's in the assessor's records out into the field as a reference point, and we will measure against that reference point. And we will put what our measurements are, or if it's within just a few feet of what the assessor's records say, we'll go ahead and use the assessor's records. But if there's a vast difference between what the assessor says and what's in the listing, we want to know why. Did the buyer say, well, that's how much, well, get a floor plan or get some verification of that square footage from the buyer so that he's not surprised when the appraiser comes back and says, well, this is all we measured. So that can have a big difference. And so there's some shortcomings when you compare what the MLS allows us to say and what the appraisal document puts into the fields. Our unit of comparison that we use is always going to be the gross livable area above grade or at grade. And there is going to be a separate line item for that below grade space. So we just cannot treat it the same. The amenities, if they're not appropriately described, we're going to call you, whether it's a listing or a comparable, we need more information about those amenities. So I want to quickly run through some segments of the form that is used for the appraisal and point out some issues that can arise. At the very top, when we are describing the subject property, the most important area here is a couple of issues. Number one, who's the client? The client for the appraiser is the lender. It's not the buyer. It's not the seller. It's not either the listing agent or the selling agent. We have been engaged by the lender. We are an unbiased third party. We are rendering an opinion, and our opinion is just that. It's an opinion. It's an art more than a science. We do have things that, we can use obviously to support that opinion. But at the end of the day, it is an opinion. And if two appraisers appraise the same property, they could have varying opinions. And the reason for those differences in opinions could be they use different data sets, or even if they use the same data sets, they processed that data into an opinion differently from one another. And that could be based on their experience, their education, just whatever. Another important field on this form is who owns the property, who's on title. If you're listing a property and the person you took the listing from is not on title, we're going to have issues. We have asked every lender at the beginning of every assignment for a copy of the title commitment that is issued. We sometimes get it, we sometimes do not. If we do not, we use the last recorded deed as the reference point for who is on title. And that may or may not match the assessor's records. And we put a copy of that deed. We get a lot of revision requests because who we state is on title isn't who the title company states is on title, but they've probably got documentation that is more recent than what is in public records. If you get a copy of the title commitment, be a good friend to your appraiser and ship that over to the appraiser so they can see who is on title and perhaps avoid a revision request and save everybody some time. So now we get into the contract section. And again, we have issues here in the contract section because changes were made to the contract after they were given to the lender, and the lender doesn't have the most recent contract. Were there any last minute changes negotiated as a result of the inspection? If this is a new construction, did the buyer change their mind about some upgrades that were planned? And did that amendment to the contract get to the lender? It's pretty embarrassing when we get a contract that says the contract price is, let's just say, $600,000. The buyer has not checked or has not selected their upgrades. We appraise the property, and this is usually done at the time the purchase is negotiated, before the property is even completed. And now we're coming down to the wire and getting close to closing. And the buyer has now selected their upgrades. The lender doesn't know that the loan amount potentially is going to change. And so we've turned in our appraisal, and now the appraised value and the contract price are out of sync. So we've had many, many, many issues with new construction. So I'm begging the listing agents for new construction that as soon as there are any amendments to the contract negotiated, please make sure that those get to the buyer's lender. It would also be very helpful if in all cases, a copy of the seller's disclosures could be put into the association documents. This kind of helps us describe the condition of the property. It goes to condition. If we know that a new roof was put on 5 years ago, or that a new heating and air conditioning was put in 5 years ago, or that the kitchen was upgraded 5 years ago, that really helps us make adjustments to the property. So putting those seller's disclosures into your association documents is a big help. The next part of the grid that we use is where we describe the subject neighborhood. Now, you'll see that there's a section there that asks for the neighborhood boundaries. All of our comparables are supposed to come from that described neighborhood. And if we go outside that neighborhood boundary, because we can't find comparables that have either sold recently or that are similar, that means we need to do one of two things. We either use data that is older from inside the neighborhood and try and make adjustments for changes in market conditions, or we expand our search outside the neighborhood. Now, in most cases, if we cannot find data within the last 6 months, we usually will employ both strategies. We'll try to find older data in the neighborhood, and we'll probably go outside the neighborhood. What we have trouble with, though, Fannie Mae limits appraisals that have adjustments, total gross adjustments of 25% or more. That creates a red flag in their underwriting system. And the more adjustments that are used, the less comparable the properties obviously are. Some of the things that we look at in terms of comparability, we look for size. And, you know, if your property has 1,500 square feet, we're going to probably go 10% lower than that and 10% higher than that to look for properties in that size range. Age range, we're going to look for properties that are, you know, probably no more than 10 years older or 10 years newer than your subject properties. Do they have a basement? Do they not have a basement? Is it a difference in style? Rambler versus a 2-story or a tri-level. So we're trying to select properties that are most similar to the subject to reduce the number of adjustments that need to be made to the data. So once we've selected the data, we now enter that data into the adjustment grid, and we begin looking and analyzing those comparables in comparison to the subject. And adjustments are made to the comparables. They're not made to the subject. We are trying to reconcile any differences between the comparable and the subject by making the difference to the comparable. And an easy way to remember whether the adjustment should be positive or negative is to say to yourself, if the comparable is superior, and I use the two letters SU, superior, if the comparable is superior, that means the adjustment is going to be subtracted, SU. So that little mnemonic helps appraisers remember. And if the comparable is inferior, and those two letters IN, then that means the adjustment is going to be an increase, IN. So superior, SU, subtract, inferior, IN, it'll be a positive adjustment. Now, what are some of the things that we make adjustments for? Probably the biggest thing right now is changes in market conditions. And we've been tracking that. And we track it by neighborhood. And one of the easiest ways, and I'll show you a case study in just a minute of how we extract market conditions adjustments, can be the sale and the resale of a property in the neighborhood that's being used as a comparable. So if we see that comparable sale number 1 sold in December of 2021, and it previously sold in July of 2020, we're going to look at that sale and resale, and we're going to compare the photographs of that first sale with the most recent sale and see if there were any major changes to the property during that buyer's ownership period. And if there weren't, then the majority of the price increase is attributable to changes in market conditions. So we do have ways to support what we're saying there. Site. There are a couple of different line items here that we look at. You're looking at location, you're looking at the site size, and you're looking at the site view. And those are 3 different elements all related to the site. First is size. You know, if they're in the same neighborhood and most of the comparable sales range from 10,000 to 14,000 square feet, we're not going to make a big adjustment for a couple of thousand square feet difference. However, if one neighborhood that we research comparables in, most of those land sizes are 5,000 to 7,500 square feet, and the subject's neighborhood is 15,000 to 20,000 square feet, yeah, we're going to try and support making an adjustment for size in that particular case. The view amenity, we are getting so many high-end custom homes with views, and we can actually track that by looking and seeing what was the price of the lot that was paid, either by the purchaser or by the builder who's building that house on spec. I had a good example of that yesterday. I had a lender come back and say, you know, I need more support for your adjustment for the view amenity here. So I ran a search in MLS for a couple of different subdivisions that had wonderful city-like views and showed that, you know, a typical 30,000 square foot lot with a huge view was selling for $225. And in the subject subdivision, a much larger site of an acre that was flat, that really didn't have the same view amenity, was selling for $4 a foot versus $10 a square foot for that particular property. So, you know, we do have ways to look at data and analyze data and come up with support for data. That's what the lender wants. They want us to support our adjustments with market extracted data. We don't just pull these things out of the air. Going down this grid, you'll see things then that are related to the type of improvements that are there. And design, we've kind of touched on. Rambler, two-story, tri-story, mid-entry, that goes there. And if subject is a mid-entry and all my comparables are not, you're going to see an adjustment on that line.
Hey, Nikki,
Yes.
a question came in. How much adjustment is given for a view? The view amenity.
You know, it depends on the difference in land value. That view amenity is being paid for in the price per lot, not in the finished price per the improvements. So if I've got a subdivision where one home with without a view, because it's being obstructed by homes in front of it, or it would have had views, you know, those lots maybe sell for, let's just use round numbers, 200, but 100, but a lot with a wonderful view that's unobstructed might sell for 250. So in that case, I can extract a $50,000 adjustment for that view. Does that answer the question?
I think it just depends on the situation, right?
It does. So then moving on to the quality of construction and the condition. Fannie Mae has 6 definitions of quality and 6 definitions of condition. And if anybody is interested, I will be happy to provide a list of those definitions. You know, quality of construction, Q1 through Q6. Q1 is going to be the highest. It's a new construction. It's got the highest level of finishes. It's in the, you know, premier subdivision. It just is top dollar. Most homes today fall in the category of Q3 to Q4. If it's a Q5, you know, that's probably a manufactured home that is pretty old. Even manufactured homes today are falling into, the newer ones are falling into the Q4 category. Condition, though, is a big, huge deal. Is the home pristine? Or is the home, is it 20 years old? It's still in its original condition with no upgrades that have been made in the last, you know, since it was built. That condition of that property is ready for some upgrades. And when you compare it to a home that has been totally upgraded, you know, you're going to see a difference in condition maybe between a C4 and a C3, or even a C5 and a C3. So, you know, we look at and try to extract by looking at similar homes in the market. And I'm going to talk about matched pair analysis in just a minute and give you some actual examples.
Hey, Nikki.
Yes.
Another question came in about the view amenity. So the question is, what about when a home is an older home on a lot that was purchased back in the day? So
then I compare that lot with new construction home lots that have similar views. And what we find out in that case is that the improvements don't contribute nearly as much to value in that situation as they do in a new construction situation. In fact, we've had situations recently where the lot probably represented 65 to 70% of overall value, and the improvements, you know, aren't contributing much at all. Hopefully that answers that question. Now, on the bottom half of the grid, this is where we look at differences between the subject and the comparable for certain elements. The biggest is probably size. And I think that there is a misconception in the market that if I'm listing a home that has 1,500 square feet, and there are some recent sales in that neighborhood, even though they only contain 1,200 square feet, but they sold for $250 a square foot, mine must be worth $250 a square foot. And that's probably not the case. And I'm going to show you how appraisers extract adjustments for that feature. And as we've already touched on, if there's a basement or any space that is below the front door, and irregardless of the quality, it's going to go on that secondary line. That's a Fannie Mae requirement. So we very carefully look at the assessor's records for the comparables we use to determine how much of that footage is actually below the front door, and we put that on that below grade line. Functional utility, we don't often make a lot of adjustments for that. Heating and cooling, does subject have baseboard heat and all the comparables have forced warm air? That's probably going to warrant an adjustment. Are there any energy efficient items like solar panels, extra insulation? Newer homes typically have a higher level of insulation than much older homes. Garage and carports. If there is a difference in the number of bays, that's going to warrant an adjustment. And we'll see an example of that in just a minute. Then porches, patios, and decks. We look at these pictures, and I looked at one yesterday that was submitted to me for support for a proposed new construction, and the comp that was submitted was a Rambler, no basement, and it had a huge in-ground pool. It had guest quarters adjacent to the pool, plus a cabana. It had a huge entertainment area with a fireplace and an outdoor kitchen. And my home that I was appraising did not have any of those amenities. And that's probably $100,000 or more worth of cost for those elements. So what's that worth when comparing to my home that doesn't have those amenities? Good question. It's very difficult to extract adjustments for those types of amenities when we know for a fact that the market does not look at the cost of the elements as something that they're willing to pay for. And I will often put in the comments section different elements of the comparables when compared to my subject. Did it have an upgraded kitchen with granite counters, and was there new laminate flooring throughout? Had the bathrooms all been upgraded? Those kinds of comments I put in the comment section so that the reader really can understand what the differences between the comparables and the subject are.
Hey, Nikki, a few more questions came in. So one of them is, when you say below the front door, can you give examples? Would a sunken living room be considered below the front door?
Probably not, if it's unless it is like a mid-entry or a tri-level. We find, and if you come into the property at the front door, you've walked up some steps and you're now at the front door, and you open the front door and there's a small landing, and you either have to go up or you have to go down. All of that above grade space is going on the above grade line, and all that space below that is going on the below grade line. Now, let's say you come into the home and it's a tri-level. So you come in and there is definitely space on this same level where you came in, but there's a stairwell that leads to some below grade space. And there's a stairwell that leads to some above grade space. Well, the main level and the above grade level are all going to go on that first line, and all of that stairwell accessed space is going to go on the below grade line. Hopefully that clears that up. You said there were
Okay.
multiple questions.
Yes, the next question is, how do you put value on shops and pools?
Oh, we're coming to that in another couple of slides. Just hang tight. We'll get there.
Okay, thank you.
Anything else?
Not at this time, thanks.
Okay. So where do the appraisers comps from? I just want to summarize this. They come from that neighborhood that we defined. A lot of times a school district can make a difference in value. A subdivision can make a difference in value. Does it have, even if it's in the same neighborhood, does it have smaller lots or bigger lots? Does it have common amenities like walking trails and parks? Is there a community center? Is there a community pool? Those kinds of things can make a difference from one subdivision to another. Our first go-to search is the subject subdivision. When I run a search, I run my search. I say I want everything that has sold. I say my time frame in the last 6 months, and I go down to the other fields and I find my subdivision and I stick it in there. And a lot of times the agents aren't even putting the subdivision in there, or they're saying other. And so a property might not even pop up in that initial search. So that's another element that agents can really be helpful. If you will look at the title or the deed and put the subdivision name into that subdivision field in the MLS, that'll help having things pop up. So then what do we look for in that defined neighborhood? Similar size, 10% to 15% more or less than the subject. Similar age, 10 years more or less than the subject. Similar construction quality, and we've talked about the 6 classifications, and similar condition. And the way we discuss condition is we look at those photographs very carefully that are in MLS. And if we see either by the photographs or in the agent's remarks that, hey, this comparable property has all brand new flooring, it has a new heating and air conditioning, it has a new roof, those are probably going to elevate the condition of that property compared to the other comparables that we are looking at. So now we're getting into the adjustments. How does the appraiser look at and define and support their adjustments? Because remember, the lender is looking for us to support. We can't just say, based on my experience, an adjustment of 10% is considered reasonable. Lenders don't buy that. We have to be able to extract from the market an adjustment with support. So we have several ways that we can do that. One is a matched pair analysis, which I'm going to show some examples of. Another is a cost benefit analysis. And I don't think I put a cost benefit analysis in on the slide, but I'll give you an example right now. Let's say in a perfect world, I have 2 homes in a subdivision that sold within 30 days of each other, same size, same floor plan. One sold for $200, one sold for $205. and I can't figure out really what the difference is. And maybe I look at the photographs and I see, aha, the one that sold for 205 has a fireplace, and maybe it has some other amenity that was superior to the other property that sold for 200,000. So I look at that $5,000 and I'm saying some of that 5,000 is probably due to the fireplace or that other amenity that this house had that house didn't. It could be something like maybe house A, they both had brand new carpet, but the carpet in house A was pink, which is not a buyer's first choice. And the flooring in house B was all hardwood, which is, going to trump pink carpet probably for most buyers. So I can extract how much extra was paid for that particular amenity by comparing those two sales. Now, let's say that my sales aren't really that close in date of sale. Well, I would make an adjustment for changing market conditions to the older sale before I then tried to extract the difference due to that particular amenity. And then maybe I look at the Marshall Value Cost Manual, and it shows me that, well, in today's market, a fireplace probably would cost $3,000 to $5,000 to install new. So then I can say, well, okay, maybe the market is saying that this fireplace is worth $1,500 to $2,500, and the balance is due to this other amenity. In our market, it might not be that straightforward because the amount of inventory currently on the market is so limited, and the number of comparisons out there that we can make are very limited. So at this point, if I cannot extract through matched pair comparison or through a cost benefit, then at that point, the lender's going to have to be satisfied with my opinion based on my experience and judgment. Now, here's another thing you might not be aware of. Every field of data in our appraisal document gets uploaded as a field of data into Fannie Mae's underwriting system. And they have certain things that red flag certain fields of data. For example, let's say that I called a comparable condition a C3. And 5 other appraisers in this market used that same comparable in a appraisal for a different property, and they called that comparable a C4. Red flag. I'm going to get a call back. Why did you call that a C3 when everybody else is calling it a C4? So every field of data in our appraisal report is uploaded into a master database field, and Fannie Mae has the most incredible database of information of homes sold over the last 10 to 15 years that you can just imagine. Now, some of the things that we have to be careful of when we're making adjustments. Every line item, if I'm making an adjustment for condition, if I'm making an adjustment for size, if I'm making an adjustment for quality, if it exceeds 10% of the sale price of that comparable, that's going to be a red flag. If my total gross adjustments of all adjustments made exceed 25%, that's going to cause a red flag. Unless I have some mitigating or explanation of circumstances that warrant it. And let me explain the difference between a net adjustment and a gross adjustment. If I have an adjustments grid in front of me, and maybe there are 4 adjustments made on it. And one got a positive adjustment of 5%, and one got a negative adjustment of 5%. And one got a positive adjustment of 10%, and one got a negative adjustment of 10%. Well, the positive and negatives washed each other out, and the net adjustment was 0. But the gross adjustment, just exclude the signs, were 5, 10, 20, 30, or 30%. Now I'm over that 25% threshold. And I'm going to have good data to support why I have exceeded that threshold. Okay, let's look at an example of a matched pair analysis. And in this particular example, I'm looking at a difference in size. So 2 homes in the same subdivision that are very similar and selling within a very close proximity and time frame to each other. One has 1,800 square feet and one has 1,500 square feet. And the one that has 1,800 sold for $325,000 or 180 a square foot. And the smaller one sells for only $300,000 or $200 a square foot. Now there are really 2 principles demonstrated here. One principle being demonstrated is that the smaller home generally sells for a higher price per square foot than a larger home. And the reason for that is there's a wider pool of available buyers competing for that home that can afford it. The second principle that is demonstrated here is the difference in size is 3,300 square feet, and the difference in price is $25,000. So the buyer of the larger home paid $25,000 more for 300 square feet more. So if I divide the $25,000 difference by the 300 square foot difference, then I see that the buyer paid only $83.33 for that additional space. They were really paying $200 a square feet for the first 1,500 square feet, and then they were paying $83.33 for the other 300 square feet. Hopefully, I've been able to make that clear. This is why you cannot, if you're listing a home and yours has 1,800 square feet and you've got a home in the neighborhood with 1,500 square feet that's sold for 200 a square, you can't list yours for 200 a square and expect it to appraise. You might find a buyer, and that's one of the issues that as appraisers we're facing, this anticipation of the market that prices are going to continue to go up. And yet historical data does not yet support that anticipation. We're appraising that property as of today, the day of our inspection, the day of our walkthrough. We're not appraising it as of 6 months from now. Although I don't know how many requests I've had in the last 6 months to refinance, to appraise for a refinance a home that was sold in the last 6 months, because already they can take cash out. So I'm not saying that what's happening in the market isn't happening. What I'm saying is that the data is not there to support yet what's happening in the market. Now, someone asked about a shop or a pool. So this is how we look at an amenity. And I'm just calling it amenity, whether it's a shop or a pool or whatever. So again, we've got we've found two homes in a similar subdivision that are very similar. Both have similar sizes, ages, conditions. One sold for $325, one sold for $300. The difference is $25,000. The only difference was that amenity. So that tells us that the market was willing to pay $25,000 more for that amenity. Whether it's a pool, whether it's a shop, it doesn't matter. Cost does not really factor into the equation. I will tell you that when I am faced with a shop or a pool, the newer the shop or the newer the pool, the better adjustment it's going to get. If it's an older shop without power, it's not going to get much more value than a garage bay at that point. We've got examples of homes that are built and then the buyer goes out and spends $50,000 building a new shop of 1,400 square feet. It's got power, it's got water, it's got a 20-foot eave height, it's got 3 roll-up doors. And, can I support a $50,000 adjustment if he then has to sell that property? Probably not. Cost does not equal value. Now let's look at an example of how we support changes for differences in market conditions. We all know that inflation is occurring. So as I mentioned earlier in the discussion, if I find that one of my comparables sold recently, I analyze that sale and resale. So let's say I've got a home that sold for $300,000 in April of 2019, has 1,800 square feet, and now it's selling 30 months later for $350,000. So I figure the amount of appreciation over that holding period and divide it by the original sale price, and that gives me the total percentage of appreciation. And if I then divide that by the number of months between sales, I can come up with a percentage of appreciation per month. And we've got matched pair analysis for this all the way from, negative to 25% for a year. So it really depends on what the price point is, because remember, the lower price points are seeing higher levels of appreciation than larger, more custom homes. So we've talked a little bit about location, if I have to go outside my neighborhood. And the way we look at that, remember, is we either use older data or we go to different neighborhoods. And if I end up doing a location adjustment or even a view amenity adjustment, it's typically going to be based on the difference in land value. It's land that is appreciating so quickly. It's not really the improvements that are appreciating all that much.
Hey, Nikki,
yes.
a question came in that kind of aligns with your previous slide. So what about rural communities and the outlying homes between rural communities? What's the best way to define that neighborhood? Is it by school district, zip code, etc.?
That's a really great question. We do a lot of appraisals in, for example, Benton City, Prosser, Findlay, Burbank, And yes, we really have to be careful how we define those neighborhoods. If I'm in Prosser, I'm going to stick within the Prosser general marketplace. If I have to go outside of that market, I'm probably going to go to Benton City or the areas between Prosser and Benton City. If I go to Burbank, I may end up using some comparables in North Pasco if there aren't enough in the Burbank market. You know, Burbank, even though it's in Walla Walla County, it really is part of the Tri-Cities. And there is more and more interest in the Burbank market today because there are so few homes for sale in the Tri-Cities market that people are willing to drive to Burbank and are just as willing to drive to Prosser, you know, so, or Benton City. So it's 6 of one, half a dozen of the other. So when I'm in a rural neighborhood, you know, I may put in my search bar Prosser, and then I will define certain criteria about my property. I'll put in some age criteria and perhaps the site's on 5 acres. Maybe I'll search for properties that are from 2 to 10 acres so that I can narrow that down. So hopefully that helps answer that question. Was there another one?
That is it for now. Thank you.
Okay. I think we talked a little bit about design adjustments and why we make those adjustments. It's just a whole lot less cheaper to construct a home with a second level than it is a same size Rambler. Mid-entries, you know, it's interesting. Mid-entries were popular back in the 60s, 70s, 80s because it was cheaper to build a home with a partial basement. That's not necessarily the case any longer when we look at these homes on sloping sites where they're building finishes that are equivalent to the main level. So we often will just use the same dollar per square foot that we used for size adjustments that we use for basement adjustments. Remember, the reason for the differences is every house, every typical house has a kitchen, a couple of bathrooms, and the rest is not as expensive space. So if I have one house that has those amenities and another but's bigger and has the amenities, it's the less expensive space that is really accounting for that additional price and value. It's, you know, it didn't have extra kitchens. It didn't have extra bathrooms probably. So it's just that extra living space, which is not as expensive as kitchens and bathrooms. Garage adjustments, we typically are seeing matched pair adjustments that we can extract for between $500 and $7,500 on older existing homes, and maybe for $7,500 and up for newer homes. If it's got an RV garage, you know, that's going to get a little bit of special attention compared to one that's just got a regular size garage. So that's kind of it in a nutshell. This presentation was really targeted for newer agents who might not be aware of how the appraisal process works. If you've got any questions, I'm happy to stay on and answer them until we're all done.
Awesome. Does anyone have any questions for Nikki? If you do, you can go ahead and speak up or just type it in the chat box. All right, well, I guess they are fully informed. So thank you so much for your time today, Nikki. You're amazing.
Well, thank you, Rosalind. I appreciate your time. And all the participants. I really appreciate your taking the time.
So I guess a question did come in. It says, someone wants to know if she missed the value of the pool.
Oh, that was in the amenity slide.
Okay,
It could have been, if you look, it says with or without a pool or a shop.
okay.
And that could really be any kind of an amenity.
All right. Well, thank you everyone who gave us your time today. We know you're all busy. Hopefully you had some key takeaways, and the biggest thanks goes to Nikki again. Thank you for volunteering to do this. We have recorded this presentation and we'll be posting it on, or probably in the newsletter. So as I said earlier, if you have peers or colleagues that missed it, please let them know that it'll be available on our YouTube channel and also in the newsletter. So thank you again. I guess that's our cue to get forward with our day. So thank you. Have a wonderful weekend, and I will see you all soon.
Thanks.
Thank you.